It's a good question to ask. Why should anyone believe in a God of any kind without evidence? That's what we're here today to find out as we dive into a Muslim video that purports to explain why we should have faith in the complete absence of any kind of evidence. And the answer, of course, is that we shouldn't. Nobody should. Nobody with a brain, anyhow. And that kind of explains a lot, doesn't it? This time out, we're looking at a Muslim channel called Towards Eternity just to see that the Muslims are doing the same old tired stupid shit that the Christians do every day. I mean, what else can they do? They have nothing that would convince a skeptic, which is why they simply do not talk to skeptics. And that's kind of telling when you think about it. So here we go with a Muslim trying to tell us that we should believe in his imaginary friend without any regard for the evidence whatsoever. Because who the hell needs that, right?
Let's talk about one of the most popular questions. Why should I believe in God whom I don't see?
Well, it's not just seeing. It's not being able to objectively detect in any way, shape, or form. And that is a fair question, whether the religious like it or not. The only time you should believe anything is real is when you have objective evidence for its existence and not one instant before. And this goes for everything without exception. Your feelings are never a good enough reason to buy into some utterly unsupported nonsense just because it gives you a dopamine hit in the brain. Yet that's all religion is, right? Just mindless emotionalism believed because it makes the adherent feel good. And that's kinda dumb when you think about it. So our theist here better have some really good rational reasons to believe, otherwise they're just dumb. Anybody think you'll succeed? Yeah, neither do I.
Especially in this materialist time, this question is asked quite often. In fact, this is why many people become atheists. Let's answer this in 4 points.
Now, I'll let him get to his 4 points in a second. But first, I love how he's trying to treat atheism like it's just another religion. Most of them tend to do that if you notice. Because that's how the religious think, and they are completely and totally wrong. We are nothing like they are. Not believing in a God is not the same as believing in one. Bald is not a hair color. Not collecting stamps is not a hobby. Yet, it seems that no matter how many times this is explained to them, either they don't get it, or more likely, they just don't want to accept that it's true. Their only real defense against non-belief is pretending that non-belief is, in and of itself, a belief. And that's kind of stupid, isn't it?
Our eyes are not the only source that leads us to the truth. In fact, it often misleads us. For example, the color of the sun looks yellow to our eyes, but it's actually white. Or the color of the sea appears blue if we only look at it with our eyes. But when we search with our minds, we understand that it's transparent.
But nobody is saying that we can only use our eyes to detect your imaginary friend. So this whole thing is starting off with a complete straw man. I need objective evidence. Any objective evidence. I'm really not that concerned. The problem is that the religious have absolutely none of that. They don't even pretend to. That's why they spend so much time waving their hands around to distract us from the fact that ultimately their emperor is buck naked. If they had evidence, which they absolutely need no matter how much they shuck and jive, they would just present it and be done with it. Yet they can't do that, can they? I wonder why.
I mean, our eyes often deceive us. So, it wouldn't be right to just trust our eyes and consider them as the absolute source and say, I don't accept what I don't see. We need to use our mind and logic as well as our eyes.
I agree. Unfortunately, the religious aren't doing that either. What the religious are using is their emotions and pretty much nothing else. That's the problem. They are starting with a conclusion reached for entirely emotional reasons, assuming that conclusion must be true because it makes them feel good, then playing irrational and immature games to reach that conclusion because that's their goal, and then pretending it must have been right all along. And that is not how any of this works. Rational inquiry doesn't start with a conclusion. It starts with a question, and that's not what the religious are doing. Evaluating the world rationally doesn't care about your feelings. It only cares about how things demonstrably are. It's up to you to deal with reality, not allow reality to be colored by your emotions. So, right off the bat, the religious are doing absolutely everything completely wrong. And that's not really much of a surprise, is it?
Then, if our eyes can mislead us even in the objects we see, it would not make any sense to deny God just because we cannot observe Him materially. It's necessary to look at the events with the eyes of the mind.
Yet, that fails miserably unless you force faith into the equation. It's why I specifically ask for objective evidence. Objective, meaning your feelings don't enter into it at all. I want a demonstration for God that goes beyond my personal interpretation. I don't matter in this evaluation, and neither do the religious. The fact that there are people out there who are personally convinced that there's a big hairy ape running around in the woods, that is not proof that Bigfoot actually exists. The fact that there are people who are convinced that those lights in the sky are actually alien flying saucers, that doesn't really prove anything. And the fact that lots of people have imaginary father figures in the sky, that doesn't prove that any of it is true. I am rejecting your faith until you can prove that your deity is more than your feelings. Why don't you get on that?
In fact, we already accept many things beyond matter. For example, you opened this video using your free will, right?
No, I clicked on a link with my finger. Yes, I get what he's saying, but I've already addressed this time and time again, and I get kind of tired of it, just like I'm sure you do. We do not accept things without evidence, and that evidence doesn't have to be necessarily empirical, which is why I specify objective, not empirical. That allows the religious to offer things beyond the five senses. And that's fine, I'm completely willing to do that. However, they can't actually offer anything of value because all they have is emotion. They have nothing else, and that, in and of itself, is a problem. They spend an awful lot of time saying, use your rational mind, and then not actually using their own. It's why they operate solely on rationalization, not rationality, and there is a difference whether they like it or not. But let's let him get back to his second point.
But you can't show me your free will materially, and you cannot deny free will either. We can count many more examples. For example, mother's compassion. Everyone knows this, but nobody can show it materially.
Actually, we can. Lots of these things show up just fine under modern medical machines. Love, which is a very common example that the religious like to use, it's very clear under an fMRI machine. All of this stuff is ultimately physical and chemical because it's just reactions within the physical brain. And the religious, they hate that. They really do. But hating it doesn't change reality. The religious are just living in eternal ignorance because for a long time they've believed things that were never true in the first place. But once we discovered the truth, they were too emotionally attached to their nonsensical beliefs to simply reject it and deal with the demonstrated facts. That's why a lot of them reject evolution, even though it is absolutely the best supported scientific theory in all of the biological sciences. Maybe in all of the sciences combined. They just don't care. It doesn't make them happy, so they squeeze their eyes closed and pretend reality doesn't exist.
Or justice, law, brotherhood, morality, goodness and evil.
All of which are just products of the human mind. We made them all up. They don't like that, of course, so as I've already said, they just pretend it's not real, but that doesn't actually change anything, does it? Every single one of those is just an emotional reaction to the real world turned into a societal belief by the human mind. There is no justice in the natural world. It's there because we put it there. If mankind ceased to exist tomorrow, so too would the concept of justice. And so too would the idea of God. These are all things we just made up. And it's funny how the religious just can't figure that out.
Even the gravitational force is accepted by the whole world and whole scientists. Everyone says there is a force of gravity, but nobody can show it materially.
But we can prove it objectively. You're missing the point, and that's hardly a surprise. Science just didn't make up gravity out of whole cloth. They took real-world observations, and then they tested them rigorously and found that they operated consistently and predictably. That's how science works. Now, do that for your God. Go ahead. That's all we've ever been asking for, and that's something that the religious simply cannot do. Put up or shut up. Pick one. Give it a shot. It really isn't that hard. Not if your beliefs are worth believing, after all.
It has only knowledge and is not material. That is to say, we believe in many concepts beyond matter without seeing it anyway.
What do you think thoughts are? They are electrochemical processes in the physical brain. Now, the religious really like the idea that our consciousness is some magical, mystical process that survives after death, so we can all go to some big party in an imaginary place and be happy forever. But that's just stupid. As I said before, it's pure emotion and no intelligence. Because they're really not that concerned. They don't care if the things in their heads accurately represent objective reality. Reality is scary, and they'd rather hide from it rather than just accept what is factually real and deal with the emotional implications thereof. Because the religious are just children. They really are. They've never outgrown their emotional temper tantrum stage where they kick and they scream and they cry when they don't get their own way. Now, this is a Muslim YouTube channel, if you couldn't tell, and the Muslims are unfortunately well known for throwing temper tantrums and murdering a lot of people when they don't get their way. You know, just like children. Well, worse than most children, because most children don't go around killing other people. Religion, unfortunately, is really good at that.
So, it doesn't make sense to say that we cannot believe in a creator just because we don't see him and we don't observe him materially.
But who is saying that? Other than you, I mean. This is just a religious straw man yanked straight out of his ass. This is why the religious don't talk to us. They talk about us, they perhaps talk at us, but they sure don't listen or comprehend what we're saying in response, mostly because they just don't care. These are videos made by religious people for other religious people, talking about the absurd misconceptions that they have about the non-religious, designed to convince other believers that they have the slightest clue what the hell they're talking about, when clearly they just don't.
Some things are so mentally clear that they are accepted without even seeing them. For example, let's say one day you opened your garage in the morning and saw a car. You didn't see anyone around at that moment. Although you didn't perceive anyone with your 5 senses, your mind tells you that someone has definitely brought this here, and you don't feel bad about that.
Especially since it was probably you. But this is really just another stupid point made without using any critical faculties. We understand that cars don't just drive themselves. Not yet anyhow, or not reliably. We know this through demonstrable personal experience in the real world. Keep that word in mind. Demonstrable. Because it matters. It will come up again soon. We know how things work because we live in the real world and we observe them working that way. If someone from some primitive tribe on a far-off island showed up in your driveway with no experience with cars or even the concept thereof in their minds, they wouldn't understand that someone drove the car there. They wouldn't even understand what they were looking at. But this is just another indication that the religious, wrongly, think that everyone is just like they are. They can't even understand, they can't even imagine a person who wouldn't think like they do, even though there are people in the real world who demonstrably don't. Because they are simply not concerned about any of that. They're just not. It is so absurdly simple to blow gaping holes through their ridiculous assertions, but they can't acknowledge that they're wrong because emotionally, that's not even a possibility. It's why they look so damn stupid. Because they are.
You think that someone who has knowledge, will, life and power must have brought this here. And even if you don't see him with your eyes, you will reach a definite conclusion with your mind.
There is a difference between a car in your garage and reality. I know the religious aren't that bright, but come on, even you can't tell me they're that dumb, right? Right?
Just like this example, the universe came into being from nothing. You open your eyes and you are in this world. And every day, 350,000 new people are born. And of course, thousands of plants and animals as well. There is always a new and constant creation. How can we suppose that the universe came into being from nothing by itself? Although we clearly know that even a car cannot come into the garage by itself.
I guess he is. And this is one of those reasons that having any kind of rational discussion with the religious is so difficult. Because they are convinced and they are conditioned not to think critically about the things that they believe emotionally. It's true because they want it to be true, not because it's demonstrably so. Because, it's not. This is why they baldly rationalize instead of thinking critically and skeptically. They're afraid of not having an immediate, emotionally comforting answer, so in the absence of that, they just make something up and declare that it must be so because it makes them feel good. But your feelings don't really matter. Reality is what reality is, whether you like it or not. But these are immature children throwing temper tantrums and pretending that they're in charge when, unfortunately for them, they simply are not. And unfortunately, they just can't get that through their heads. And that's kind of sad, isn't it?
How can we accept that thousands of creatures come into the world by themselves every day?
Observation mostly, because they seem to be doing just fine without any supernatural help. Go ahead, prove me wrong.
As in the first example, there must be a creator who has knowledge, will, life and power. Even if we don't see him materially, we can see him with our minds.
No, you do it with your imagination. There's a difference. The religious really want it to be true because it makes them happy. Therefore, it must be true, whether it's objectively defensible or not. Because they just don't care. I hate to have to keep saying that, but it's true. It is the religious mindset. It was my mindset back in the days when I was religious. I didn't care. I really didn't. I just wanted some more of those feel-good chemicals coursing through my brain, so I'd believe whatever it took to make that happen. Of course, back then, I had no idea whatsoever what was actually going on, any more than this guy does, but that's how it actually works. People get addicted to their brain chemistry and will do anything to keep the addiction rolling. Welcome to religion, folks. It really is pathetic the more you think about it.
The artist isn't found inside his art materially, just as a painter is not found in his painting or a carpenter is not found in the table. The creator of the universe should also not be found materially in the universe.
You mean that creator you haven't proven exists, right? Because you notice what he's just done. He threw out a bunch of emotionally comforting platitudes and then proceeds as though he's actually demonstrated something real. But he hasn't. He's done nothing of the sort. But because he's not talking to skeptics, only those who are already convinced and already believe what he's saying, they're desperately seeking a way to reach their favorite conclusion, whether that conclusion makes any sense or not. He just has to wave his hands and make some comforting overtures, and suddenly he's off to point 4, which is entirely rationally unsupported. Because he doesn't care. None of them do. It's why they're terrified to just sit down and have an intelligent discussion with the non-believers, because we'd point out the underhanded methods that they use, just as I'm doing right now. But they can't handle that, can they? They'd rather run back to the religious safe space and huddle in fear.
Art already tells us about its artists, and also a painter doesn't share the same nature with his painting. So the creator is not similar to what he created. They are two different natures.
Then how do you tell what your creator is like if your creator is inherently different from his supposed creation? And the answer, of course, is that they couldn't, but the religious already pretend that they know all about their supposed deities simply because it's all just made up. And that's another reason they don't want to talk to us, because we're going to ask questions that they have no intelligent answers to. No rational answers anyhow. We are not going to accept their blind faith as gospel truth. They need that. We won't provide it because we don't care about their feelings. We care about their facts. We care what can be objectively demonstrated to be true, and that's the biggest difference between the religiously delusional and the rest of us. We're not crazy.
God has a nature that is free from matter and space. Then, to expect to observe the Creator materially in the universe is the most fundamental mistake. What we need to do is to use our mind, observe the book of the universe, and find its writer. Everything, every detail of the universe tells us clearly about Allah, God.
Except it doesn't. But again, they aren't looking to reach the truth. They don't give a crap. They think they already have it, and they are only desperately looking for a way to reach their pre-existing emotionally comforting conclusions, whether it's demonstrable or not, because they don't care. It's why I don't accept religious faith as a valid way of knowing anything about, well, anything. Because I don't care what you think. I care only what you can demonstrate with objective evidence to prove your ideas are real, and the religious have absolutely nothing in that regard. All they can do is run around proclaiming that they are right because they're already convinced that they are right. They have nothing of substance to present to those who don't already buy into their blind faith. It's why in the West, where people tend to be actually educated, religion is dying a slow and painful death. And that's a good thing.
Just be careful and read the subtleties of His mercy and wisdom through the chain of events. Don't forget to subscribe and follow our upcoming videos. I hope we can reach people who are in search together, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
It's why you're not making this video for anyone but your own little religious group, because you can't convince anyone else that you have the slightest clue what the hell you're talking about. And it's hardly a surprise that if you look in the comments on this video, it reads like a bunch of brainwashed idiots. Nobody is asking any serious questions, at least not that I saw back when I looked, because this is all about the feels and not remotely about the reals. They aren't concerned. Oh look, someone told us something that supposedly justifies what we already believe. It's why they're only looking for more true believers, and anyone who says, hey, wait a minute, those people simply get rejected as heretics, and in some Muslim-majority countries, abused and often murdered in cold blood because we've insulted their idiotic beliefs. Well, screw your beliefs. I don't care what you believe. I care only what you can prove, and you can't prove a thing. That's a problem whether the religious want to admit it or not. But they don't because it gets in the way of their feelings. Well, I'm sorry, but fuck your feelings. Come on back when you've got some facts to present, which means we'd never see any of these people again. And I'd be completely fine with that if not for the fact that religion is one of the most destructive forces on the planet today, especially Islam. And that's why I speak out against it. Someone has to. People need to stop being terrified of the religious and their unwarranted social and political power. It's time to stand up against these morons and point out the copious flaws in their so-called thinking. Because these people are unjustified in absolutely everything they believe. And they just don't care. They really don't. And that's utterly sad.
Bum